son.
Oh, is that right?
Yeah, he's 6.5 years old.
Yeah.
This is his layout, and I have one in the attic, and I'll let you see that before you leave.
Oh, I'd love to.
What you'll want to see is up there.
Yeah.
On my military.
Yeah. Right.
Bring you a little bit up to date on me.
Yeah, sure.
I was in the amphibious.
Uh-huh.
And if you ever hear of a Higgins boat, Andrew Jackson Higgins?
Absolutely.
That built the Higgins boats?
Right. Uh-huh.
Believe it or not, I was drafted into the Navy in 1943.
I see.
I was trying to volunteer for the Air Force, but I didn't have my high school diploma.
Uh-huh.
And so I was hoping to get in the Air Force because I had made model airplanes and then it was a hobbyist.
Right.
And I was hoping to get into the Air Force on an aptitude test. And I was born in Childress and raised in Quanah.
Uh-huh.
On Highway 287 toward Amarillo. And I'd gone to Wichita Falls and taken my test for the Air Force, trying to volunteer because among my buddies and one that were already in the service, they said, if you don't volunteer for the Marines or the Navy, you're going to end up into that walking army. This is the terminology they use in the infantry, and you're going to be facing your enemy from a foxhole. And when your enemy, you raise your head up, and he shoots, he's shooting at you. If you get in the Navy, you know, that would be somewhat true of the Marines.
Right.
But they were a little more glorious
right.
in the infantry. He said, if you, most of my buddies are going in the Navy. If you volunteer for the Navy, and you get aboard ship, well, the enemy will aim at that ship.
Uh-huh.
He's not aiming at you as an individual.
Right.
And if he hits that ship, you might be lucky enough to be on the stern if he hits the bow or whatever. But the one thing for sure, as long as that ship's afloat, you got a place to eat and sleep, and it won't be in a foxhole. Right. And that was the terminology that was spreading among us.
Exactly. Good recruiting. Yeah, I can understand that. Yeah.
So I volunteered for the Air Force, and I was waiting to hear whether I was going to be accepted or not. And I got my draft notice. Well, I hadn't heard from the Air Force, and so apparently I didn't get accepted, and into my volunteer for the Air Force. Anyhow, I had to go from Quanah to Lubbock for in physical, and I got in Lubbock, took my physical, and of course I worked the farms all the time. Even though I lived in town, and I worked the farms in between school terms and whatever. So I was in good physical shape. And I came out of the end of that physical line. I had never had a needle of any sort until I had to take that blood at the courthouse. They took a blood sample from me for my military, and that was the first thing I ever had to do with anything medical. I was 18 years old.
Wow.
I got in Lubbock. Of course, they start puncturing you again, and I come out of the end of that physical line, and your medical papers are following you. And I came out of the end of that physical line. There was a soldier, a sailor, and a Marine. And papers came up, and a soldier looked at them and didn't even say anything, just passed it on to the Navy. And the Navy said, yeah, we'll take him. And it passed it on down to the Marine. And the Marine said, no, you don't get this one, I get him. Because my medical record was, I guess, that good. I didn't know, but I thought I was being a victim of a practical joke, because back then the old Bob Hope and Gene Autry movies, not Gene Autry, but the Bing Crosby movies and things were South Sea Island, Dorothy Lamour, and
Road 2,
the grass sarong and all that. And so in those movies, I was always pulling practical jokes on each other. So I figured, well, I'm a victim of a practical joke. And so I sat there and looked, a dumb look on my face, and finally the Marine said, well, what is it? I said, what do you mean, what is it? And he said, Navy or Marines? I said, you mean you're giving me a choice? He said, you got to do something. And I said, well, then I'll take the Navy. Well, what do you got against the Marines? And I said, I don't have a dad ready thing against the Marine, but I don't know one of them. All my buddies are in the Navy, and I figured my chances of me serving with one of my buddies, my high school buddies, was better in the Navy than it would be in the Marines. So he looked at the sailor and pushed my medical back to the sailor. He said, I'll buy that. And the sailor said, you're in the Navy now, and he stamped my papers.
Wow.
And it turned out that they were building up, this is in October 1943. August, September 1943. it turned out that they were building up the amphibious forces for the island hopping campaign back across the Pacific and getting ready for Normandy invasion, which
Right.
they needed the amphibious to put the troops on.
Exactly.
And so they didn't have near enough crewmen as far as Navy personnel to man the boats. So every little small boat, that's the LCM, is a 3-man crew.
Right.
I make that out of sheet metal.
I see.
It's a hobby. It's not available as a model.
Yeah.
So I make that from my military buddies.
Right.
I've made 30-something of them.
I'll be darned. Wow.
And so that's the boat we man. It's 50-footer. They made it in a 50-footer and a 60-footer. I mean a 56-footer.
Yeah.
And I have to keep my grandkid out of it.
Right, I understand.
It's all sheet metal. I worked in aircraft after I got out of the service for 12 years.
Right.
And went through sheet metal, so this is my sheet metal training. And that's all made out of sheet off of a steel door like that.
I see.
So if you,
Wow.
it's all sheet metal.
All sheet metal. Oh yeah, I can tell.
Yeah.
I'll be darned. That is really something. Wow.
In our military reunion, coming up in September the 28th through October the 1st, be in San Antonio this year, and it floats around every year.
Right.
And we have a hospitality room and then a raffle. They don't call it. They don't have an auction. They have a raffle.
Right.
To raise money for the next reunion, to secure places for the reunion.
Right.
And they ask somebody to donate to the raffle. So I donate to the raffle one of these every year.
Yeah.
And but everybody, all my military buddies wants one of them, and they don't want to wait, for the chance of another year of winning one. So they put their name in, and I make them a little at a time. It takes me about 3 weeks to make one of them.
Right.
So anyway, well, I ended up in the amphibious forces. I went through boot camp in San Diego, came out of boot camp, and went to Coronado Island and made it. And at Coronado Island, we went through amphibious training and trained. We go over to picked up the Marines, and we worked as a unit. Amphibious forces, getting their exercises on the beach, and putting the Marines on shore in their exercises.
Right.
So that's what we would be doing in the Pacific, was putting the Marines on the beaches to secure the islands.
Yeah, I see.
And the infantry and whoever else came along.
Exactly.
So
what was your job exactly?
I ended up I went overseas as a coxswain on one of these, and the coxswain is in the war there was no such things as ranks. Right. Everybody was seaman 3rd class. Qualified this and qualified that. You was a qualified coxswain or qualified motor mech or qualified electrician, but not by rank, because they didn't have the they didn't give everybody the rates and ranks.
Yeah.
So I went overseas as a qualified coxswain, and that was a boat handler. Because I was pretty good at handling the things, even though I was a landlubber.
Right.
And I got overseas. I volunteered for when I got in boot camp, and we giving you your aptitude test for training. I volunteered for mechanic, motor mechanics. I wanted to learn an occupation that I could use when I came home out of the Navy.
I see.
And I know just boat handling and that type of stuff wasn't going to be something a landlubber would be doing.
Right.
So I put in my application for motor mech school, and the school was full. I couldn't get in because they were just running them in literally by the thousands. So I ended up qualified coxswain, handling the boats. Because as we exercise, we rotate around, exercise the boat. The big thing is getting the things on and off the beaches without broaching, without getting stranded on the beach. And I can handle the boat very good.
Yeah.
They gave us the theory of handling, thrust and waves, the tides and waves and what have you. And they gave you the theory of how to overcome that, but putting it to work was something else.
Right.
So I was pretty good at it. And anyway, I got overseas and got all the way up to the Admiralty Islands. And the dispatch called me out one morning, and I've been there about 3 months, and he called me out and says, "We see where you were trying to get a motor mech school." And I said, "Yeah, but school was loaded and I didn't get in."
Right.
he said, well, you still interested in motormac? I said, where am I going to go to school? He said, well, it's going to be hands-on. He said, we'll give you a book to study, and if you can pass the test, if you'll do it, he said, we are short on mechanics. And he said, if you'll do it, well, you get a rate of motormac second class. Well, that was actually a rate. You got a seaman person into the rate. So I came out motormac second class.
I see.
And motor machinist mate.
Right.
So anyway, they gave me a book on steam. Well, believe it or not, I learned a whole lot about steam, and I never was on a boat that was powered by steam. Never was on a ship powered by steam. And so anything though was superheated steam, saturated steam, and all the different things that were involved in driving steam turbines and reciprocal engines, steam reciprocals and whatever. And I passed the test and made motormac.
Yeah.
Well, I came, it was a beer parlor, but right after that, we're down at the beer garden, and you got every third day you got a beer ration. And I was down at the beer garden, and one of our motormacs heard that I had changed from coxswain to motormac, and he looked at me, and he had gone through the motormac school from San Antonio. He's a big old tall German boy from, forget now what his name was, but he had gone through the motormac school. He says, so you're a motormac. He said, I bet you don't even know the difference from a 4-stroke cylinder to a 2-stroke cylinder, do you? And I said, no, but I sure do wish I did. Well, he took a liking to me, and I got the best training from that individual like that I could have gotten if I'd have gone through school.
I'll be darned.
Because he went through every detail that was involved in reciprocal engines. And it turns out that the General Motor diesel that was powered these things, gray marine diesels, we called them then, was a 2-stroke cycle diesel. Like a lawnmower 2-stroke cycle. It banged on every other stroke. And had a forced draft, not forced draft, but I'll think of it. Yeah, forced draft supercharger.
Okay.
And instead of a turbine, it was a positive displacement, was the term I'm thinking of. Positive displacement supercharger on it. Because it being a 2-stroke cycle engine, the only way it could have run was to be supercharged. And that was a powerful engine. It was a very great marine. It was the engine that powered all of our Greyhound buses that traveled from coast to coast right after the war. You had the diesel engine. They were all powered by the same 2-stroke cycle diesel engine, General Motors diesel. So anyway, well, I learned the ins and outs of that thing, and came out of the Navy as motor machinist.
In the Higgins boat?
Yeah, in the Higgins boat.
I see. So you went from a coxswain to a motormac.
Yeah.
And that paid a little more money, I take it.
It paid a little more money, not much more then. Not that you could notice it a whole lot, but
now these had 3-man crews. Is that what they?
3-man crew had a coxswain, motormac. Of course, there's the access to the engine room.
Right.
So if you look at it here, you have a right and left.
Right.
And the engines turn opposite rotation. And
what did the coxswain do? He just pretty much go everywhere?
Well, the coxswain was the boat handler.
Right.
And motormac was you had one deckhand that had to secure lines. But your I don't know, this thing didn't stick.
So the coxswain drove the boat.
The coxswain drove the boat.
Right.
And he was
right there.
Right. He was the skipper of the boat.
Right.
The funny thing was, for the rest of the war, I was the coxswain and the motormac.
I see.
Because they asked me when I changed over, he said, well, do you need us to send you out another coxswain, or is your deckhand qualified coxswain? I said, well, he ain't a qualified coxswain, but he might want to be. And so I said, can I ask him? And I asked my deckhand, I said, you want to be the coxswain? He said, yeah. And they said, well, you train him how to handle a boat, and your motormac, he's the coxswain. So I trained my coxswains, and none of them ever got before they could handle the boat as good as I could.
Right.
So running the boat across the harbor and back and forth, and just like pulling into a open parking space is no problem. But if you had to parallel park the thing in a tight quarter or something, they'd turn the boat over to me every time. So until I came out, I was pretty much the coxswain and the motormac. Anyway, that was what we did for 2 years. Now, the World War II in the picture of the whole game. The bulk of any war is logistics.
Right.
Far more than fighting.
Yes, sir.
Because the fighters can't fight if they haven't got something to fight with. And
Right.
logistics is what gets them something to fight with.
Right.
So securing the beach was generally, in our case, like at Guadalcanal, it was a week, less than a week of operation.
Right.
But several months of logistics after you secure the beaches of getting all the equipment, all the CBs, you got to get all your CBs on land.
Right.
You know, you're starting from ground scratch. Those islands had no roads in them.
Right. So the CBs had to be there first.
CBs are the first things we offloaded.
Right.
So the ships went in with the CBs, we secured the beaches, and I went through 2.5 years, 2 years overseas, never saw a shot fired in anger.
Yeah.
But I had a lot of close calls, and I was right in the middle of it.
Right.
But I always got caught on the tail end of the line, offloading the equipment.
Right. Right.
See?
Yeah.
So, in that sense, I was blessed for whatever reason.
Sure.
Because I never was in the heat of the battle.
Right.
The ones that secured the beaches on the front lines went through hell, but I never was in that position.
Right. Right. So, where all did you land? Where in the Pacific?
I
probably can't recall them all, but you.
Yeah, I can pretty well recall all. Because in my case, we were land-based.
Right.
We were not ship-based.
Mm-hmm.
And I went from San Francisco to New Hebrides Islands, the furthest south you could get, just out of reach of the furthest bases that were occupied by the Japanese. So when Japan hit Pearl Harbor, they started occupying the islands.
Right.
Especially the islands that had raw materials and stuff that they needed to support their operations. So about the furthest they got south was at Guadalcanal.
I see.
They didn't make it to New Caledonia or down to the New Hebrides Islands. So our basis of operations and first offload the Marines was at New Caledonia. We made some of the biggest bases of moving our equipment was from New Zealand and Australia. The ships would go there. But my first ship overseas was the USAT Seabarb. There were 3 Hollands in our unit, and they got me mixed up with one of the others. And he got my crew and my ship that I was supposed to go out on, and I ended up with his crew and his ship that he was supposed to go out on when we left San Francisco. So our record was messed up, and for that reason, I'm playing follow-up. I'm trying to catch up to my unit.
Yeah.
which I missed because of the mix-up of names.
Right.
So it took 6 months for me to get my record straightened out before I could ever even draw a paycheck.
I see.
And so anyway, well, the Holland RL that got my boat and my crew ended up on an LSD number 4, a Brazos ship. And that's the ship I traveled from Guadalcanal to the Admiralties. But anyway, my first ship was an Army Transport Seabarb that I was playing catch-up with. And the rule of thumb in World War II was if a ship was faster than the fastest sub, it always went solo. If it couldn't outrun the fastest sub, then it always went convoy.
I see.
And because you were safer in a convoy than you were in solo.
Right.
That Seabarb was a new ship made as a troop carrier, and made as a cargo ship, but converted into a troop carrier, and it was an Army transport. USAT is Army Transport Seabarb. Had a top speed of 28 miles, which is fast for anything that's closely related to a cargo ship. And so we cruised at 21 knots, and we crossed the Pacific Ocean, zigzag course, solo, from San Francisco to the New Hebrides Islands in 13 days.
Wow.
I mean, you can believe it.
That's moving.
13 days, which it took most of them a month to get overseas.
Yeah.
And but in that 13 days, and that's zigzagging.
Right.
Every 7 minutes you change course.
Exactly.
So that didn't shorten the distance any. But we pulled in New Hebrides Islands Christmas Eve, 1943. Well, for the lack of a place to stay, when we got there, the receiving base was full and they had no place to put us. So I'm playing catch up, and there was 500 sailors on that boat, on that ship, and the rest of them were all soldiers. And they put me with a CB battalion that was already based in New Hebrides. I got put with the 44th CB battalion as temporary replacements until they could make a room for me in our own unit. So I did that for a month, and so my tent put me in with the CBs, 6 men to a tent. Woodrow Watts from West Virginia took a liking to me. He was a mess cook. And my first evening off of that ship, and he put with the CBs, had just gotten in the tent, and as the guys came in from their duties, I was being introduced, and here comes old Woodrow with a gallon jug, and he starts pouring everybody a drink. And he says, "You want some of this?" And I said, "What is it?" "Oh, it's a little jungle juice I brewed up." Anything that was homemade, they called it jungle juice. This little jungle juice that I brewed up, and I said, "Well, what's it like?" "Oh, it's like a light wine." And so I had my canteen shut, and I said, "Well, pour me some of it." So he poured me a can of it, and God, it tasted awful, but it was alcohol. And I wasn't a drinker. But anyway, I become one of the crew. So he said, "You know where the movie theater's at?" And I said, "I just got here. I don't know where nothing's at." He said, "Stick around and I'll take you to the after chow." He being a mess cook, he'd stick around till after chow. So it's got to get dark enough, and it was open air theater. It's got to get dark enough for the movies. He said, "I'll take you down and show you where the theater's at." So after chow, we go down, and we'd had that drink, an hour before. Well, we got down to waiting for turn the projectors on, and I looked at old Woodrow, and his eyes was glued to the center of his nose. I'm telling you, I don't remember that he was cross-eyed. And that was his jungle juice that was doing And about that time I looked down at that screen, and it started wallowing around. There was 2 of them, one over here and one over there. So my eyes were wallowing in their sockets. I said, "What in the world did you make that stuff out of?" He said, "Grapefruit juice." Anything you could get out of the mess hall, put a little yeast in it and work it off, became alcoholic. Well, some of that stuff was weird. So I tread lightly, but anyway, he took a liking to me. First day out on the work schedule with the CBs, they put me out pouring cement for making warehouses for Quonset Hut warehouses, storing military goods. And I come in that evening, he said, "What did they put you doing?" I said, "Well, I've been pushing hot cement all day in a wheelbarrow." And he said, "Well, you want to do that, or you want to work in wash a few pots and pans?" He said, "I can get you mess duty if you rather do." And I said, "Keep that hot sun out." So I got mess duty, and the only mess duty I did all the time I was in the Navy was for the rest of that 1 month that we was with 44th CB Battalion.
I see. Okay.
And then this one I don't remember the ship. They put us aboard the ship and took us from there, New Hebrides, to Guadalcanal. Didn't take the CB, but just took our group.
Right.
But I stayed with 44th until they called us together and took my group on up to Guadalcanal. And to say Guadalcanal is it's deceptive because of this. We say Guadalcanal, but I never set foot on Guadalcanal per se. The Iron Bottom Bay is where the Coral Sea Battle took place. And Florida Island is roughly 35 or 40 miles across the bay from Guadalcanal. And so nearly all the rough fighting took place over on Florida Island, and all the CB bases and military bases built up was on Florida Island.
Right.
And we called it Turner City.
I see.
So the CBs had their bases there, and we had our base, and the Army had, and Marines had their bases there. And Guadalcanal was just for the airfield that they called Henderson Field. So they set up bases but that was mostly Marines and Army at Guadalcanal, and Navy and the Marines and Mattel was at Florida Island. But there was a lot more over on Florida Island there was on Guadalcanal as far as, but Florida Island wasn't as big. And I was there for 3 months. We did advanced training on the boats.
I see.
And they saw that my records had been changed up, so they reassigned me to an LCM. I ended up with one of these little LCPPs. It's a 36-footer, like this here, and has one of those General Motor diesels. And that's the one that puts the troops on the beach. And this was made for the
tanks.
For the tanks. That's made for the Sherman tanks.
I see. This one was. This big one,
And So I'll let you read that. So.
Yeah, I'd started reading it before. Yeah. So you were a motor mech for this one?
Yeah. No, I was motor mech for this.
Right. Okay.
What happened is that the Holland RL, what they did is you trained in the small boats, and if you got good on the small boats, then you graduated up to the larger boats.
Right.
And the funny thing is that the small boats were harder to handle than the large boats.
Uh-huh.
Because you only had one engine and one rudder to do everything.
I see.
This one you've got opposing thrust and two rudders and two engines, and you've got push on one and pull on the other. And so if you learn that, this boat, you can do a lot more with it. Right. That one is much more apt to strand on the beach. And so if you could keep that one from stranding, that qualified you for the bigger boats. So I moved up to this. But when they got my name mixed up with the other Holland, he had a LCVP crew. That's called LCVP, Landing Craft Vehicle and Personnel.
LCVP is the smaller one.
Is a smaller one. And
LC mechanized.
Yeah, is a larger one.
Is a larger one. Okay.
And the VP was originally just a rounded bow.
Uh-huh.
And it was called the LCP, Landing Craft Personnel. Mm-hmm. But the troops jumping off the bow, they could get them high and dry on the beach, but they were, with their field packs and things, they were breaking and stringing their ankles and injuring their legs. Right. Just in the haste of getting off the boats. So they come up with the idea of putting a little ramp in the bow. Mm-hmm. Well, the little ramp was wide enough for a troop to get through with field packs, so they could let the ramp down on the beach and you could walk off the boat. So it was LCPR, Landing Craft Personnel with a ramp.
I see.
Then the Jeeps came out.
Yeah.
The Jeep carrier.
All right.
And they figured, well, we widen that ramp and carry a Jeep. So they were called Jeep Lighters. So the nickname, this is Tank Lighter and Jeep Lighter.
I see.
And that's what they were called in all of our units.
Yeah.
So the ramp was widened from that little narrow ramp to that wider one to be able to carry a Jeep and a piece of field artillery.
I see.
And so anyway, well, I had went through that and then on up to, and this is what I spent my time on over there.
Right here.
And that. So then I got back got on Florida Island, and we did 3 months of that training. Now,
advanced training.
Advanced training, practicing in the surf and going around the surf sides of the islands and really getting into rough weather and things and handling the boats and getting ready to go on up the line. So Bougainville and Ribal was above us.
Uh-huh.
And I don't know how familiar you are with the Pacific operation.
Somewhat, but go ahead.
Well, the Pacific operation, we called it an island hopping campaign. Uh-huh. Because there was no way that you'd ever get those Japanese out of those islands.
Right.
They were too heavily entrenched.
Yeah.
So the island hopping campaign was that they said, well, we'd never get them all out of Ribal or Bougainville, but we can circumvent, go around those islands, cut off their supplies, bomb their fields and destroy all their planes where they can't get out, and we can just choke them to death.
Right.
And not ever try to secure the island.
I see.
Just render them helpless.
Yeah.
So that's what the island hopping campaign was. So we went around Bougainville and Ribal and went up to, and they had already secured the beaches in Papua New Guinea and up in that side of it. But that was a little bit further west than we needed to be. So we went up to the Admiralty Islands, which is just below the equator. And also the Imaru Islands, which is 150 miles from the equator. And the Admiralty Islands had the largest natural harbor in the entire Pacific. 54 miles long and 15 miles wide.
Wow.
Only one entrance. And the entrance was 94 feet deep.
Right.
And everything else between those island chains was reefs. And when the tide went out, you could walk from island to island. If the tide was in, only very shallow draft boats and very particular maneuvering could get through.
Right.
So we figured it a safe harbor, but we couldn't police 54 miles of harbor. Right. So we subnetted off 15 miles of that harbor. And it became the major base of operations for World War II out in the Pacific. I saw you'll see some pictures up there in a minute.
Okay.
I saw 700 ships in that harbor at one time.
Wow.
And well, they say 700. I doubt if that was. The rumor was that they were in it. But after we had secured the islands and we had the Japs so deep, so far back, that we never even bothered to turn out the lights. Everything was, the ships were lit day and night. Because they needed lights to see by, and they worked. When you first secure the islands, you're in a total blackout situation.
Right.
But everything's secured. The few Japs that wasn't killed in that operation took to the jungles, and they took them by prisoner a few at a time. And I spent the rest of my time there in the Admiralties. The first shipment of that left Florida Island went to Emerald a week before we went to Admiralties, and they were just 150 miles apart.
I see.
But Boat Crew 10. Now, our unit was called Standard Landing Craft Unit 18, and up out of that unit they made boat crews. In our Boat Crew 15, we had like 250 boats, and that's all we did was haul ship to shore, ship to shore, ship to shore. But again, because there were no islands, no roads and no docks or anything. So first thing we did in the Admiralties when we got there was built Mersum dock for the ships to be able to offload and not have to wait on the boats to haul. They could pull up beside the dock and offload right at the dock. And so all the major North Pacific campaigns was pretty much launched from the Admiralty Islands.
I see.
And a lot of people don't know that because during the war they didn't let everything be known that they were doing.
Right.
They made up the draft to go to the Philippines, but the island hopping campaign was advancing so rapidly that it was hard for them to know exactly what to do from one operation to the next because they were overlapping themselves. So they needed bases further north, but when they got to the Admiralties and they went to the Philippine Islands, making up a draft to go to secure the beach of the Philippine Islands, they were now fighting on Iwo Jima and Okinawa.
Yeah.
And the biggest cases of we may not need these bases closer to. So the draft was made up but postponed. That was to go to the Philippines. And I was on that draft. And we'd volunteer for every draft that was made up for another boat crew to go up the line. Well, I was taken off the draft. When it was postponed for 30 days, and then when it was finally called back up, they had me and one other guy, I don't remember who the other guy was, but Holland fall out. Well, I fell out, got out of the draft, and get your gear and go back to base. And the other guy that was called out. And so after the rest of them, get your gear and report to the dock. Well, I go to the guy in charge and I said, what does that mean? Am I off this draft? He said, it means you're off this draft. I said, well, why am I off the draft? He said, well, you got 18 months overseas duty already. And that's a no-no for this draft. I said, what's that got to do with it? They said, well, you're qualified for a furlough. Oh, well, what chances have I got of getting a furlough? Well, very, very nil that I've had a chance for getting a furlough. I went through the whole 2 years and never had, I got one 3-day pass out of the whole 2.5 years of operation.
Right.
But no furloughs. We don't want you to get up there in the heat of the battle and start hollering, I want to go home. You know, like fat chances you'd get to go home, but the idea being you leave the well enough alone, you don't create situations.
Yeah.
So I was taken off that draft and I served the rest of my time right there in the Admiralty Islands.
Right.
And I had several close calls, but we brought them on ourselves. All of our close calls were hair-raising close calls, and I'll show you some of those up there in a minute.
Yeah.
I've got an album that I made up.
Right.
And you were asking for pictures.
Right.
And you can take the pictures out of the album.
I see. Okay. Good.
And,
Good.
If you could use that thing, if pictures of that or anything you could use of it, you're welcome to do that. This is made for my next reunion. It's coming up in San Antonio.
Right. Yeah. I want to see what you've got for sure. So you spent your whole 2 years in the Pacific.
In the Admiralty.
Right. Okay. And then so when were you when did you come home?
I came home December the 25th at Seattle, Washington, 1945.
1945.
And got on an old Liberty ship coming home. Took 21 days.
Yeah.
From the Admiralty, it was much closer than Hebrew.
Right.
Than New Hebrides.
Right.
But boarded that Liberty ship and went just north of the Hawaiian island, but out of eyesight. If you had binoculars or field glasses, you could see the Hawaiian islands.
Mm-hmm.
And we got to the Hawaiian chain. We had spent 2 years overseas. The first thing we did when we got overseas, Guadalcanal, Admiralty, whatever, we turned in all of our gear, stored it in the warehouse, kept our blue jeans, cut the legs out of them, and a shirt. And during the day, we just wore a pair of cut-off blue jeans. That's all we ever wore.
Yeah.
You had Navy military, Marine military. We had in our unit as amphibious. We carried 2 field packs. We carried a Navy field pack and a Marine field pack.
Right.
Because you never knew when you went to the beach whether you were going to get stranded and fight with them or back to your assigned duty. So you carried the 2 field packs just in case.
Right.
So anyway, we had Marine brogans with the tops cut out of them, so we could walk in and out of them. Because on those steel deck boats, you couldn't go barefooted.
Right.
And at 1.5 degrees off the equator, that got hot.
Yeah, imagine. Yeah.
So anyway, we had suntans out of this world.
You had what?
Had suntans out of this world.
Oh, I bet.
All day long. That's all we wore.
Yeah.
At night, we had to be in full dress. And what I don't mean a dress uniform, but had to be fully clothed with sleeves, legs, everything for malaria.
Right, sure. Yeah.
So we had to be, after sundown, 30 minutes after sundown, we had to be fully clothed. Well, the humorous thing was that all these guys had been spent 2 years over there with no Navy regiment whatever. Just, hey, you're there to do a job, you do it. And I'll give you an example of first thing that happened to us when we hit the Admiralty was, like, I've got buddies that's aboard a ship out there, and the ship pulls in, and I know one of my high school buddies is on that ship. Well, I go to dispatch, said, can I check out the boat and go out? That was happening too awful. So the dispatch called the whole unit down. Hadn't been there 3 weeks, and he said, all right, we're getting too many personal requests. Can I use my boat for this? Can I use my boat for that? He said, we know that you've all got buddies and assigned to different units. So as far as we're concerned, that's your personal job. And you're 12 hours on and 12 hours off. Don't come hollering to us, can I do this or can I do that? If you're on your 12 hours off and there's a ship in that harbor that, regardless of where it's at, you keep your fuel, you got a fuel barge out there and you keep your tanks full all the time. If you want to use that boat to go visit a buddy aboard that ship, have at it. You just better be here for your next tour of duty or you're in trouble.
Right. Yeah.
so that's your personal job. Well, that's the way we handled it.
Right.
We didn't have to go ask, can I use the boat for this? And we came in and we had to catch a duty boat from where we moored our boats to an anchor buoy. We had got 100 yards from now on into the beach, and the duty boat took us in and out. But we were land-based operations.
Yeah.
And lived in Quantum huts.
Right.
First 6 months we were in tents, and then they built Quantum huts.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we ended up there.
Right.
So anyway, well, one of my high school buddies, I got a letter from his girlfriend. I was writing to her from Turbiville. I got a letter from H.V. Ball was his name. He was in the Marianas. When it appeared in the Marianas. And he was aboard Admiral Halsey's flagship, USS Argonne.
Okay.
Converted luxury liner.
Right.
Well, he, I think, was in Boat Crew Unit 10. But he had did a little rescue operation for medical supplies. It was beyond he risked his neck beyond the call of duty, and that got him special duty aboard Halsey's flagship, which he hated because that was regimentation. So I got a letter from his girlfriend, and she said, I just got a letter from HP, and email letter. In fact, it took 6 weeks to get from station to overseas. I got a letter from her that said HP's aboard Halsey's flagship, headed for ports unknown. Says keep an eye. Who knows? It may come your way. Well, that particular day, I had hauled a load of a little fighter strip down on the island on the far end of that, 54 miles down the island. We're building a fighter strip down there, and we're carrying a load of supplies to the fighter strip. And it took all day to go down there and back. Come back that evening, anchored just right off of the boat 215 anchor post with the USS Argonne. That's the name that she said HB's on it. It's on the Argonne. So as soon as I didn't even get off the boat. As soon as we docked and the duty boat came up and picked up my two crewmen, I cast off and went out to the flagship Argonne, which is Navy.
Right.
Regimentation, full dress, go through just like his stateside, even though he was never on board. He made his office in Pearl Harbor, but that was his hotel overseas.
Right.
So I tied up the gangplank, and I go running up the gangplank in my cut-off dungarees. No headgear, no hat, didn't even have one. And old officer today stopped me, and I got up. I said, he says, "Where do you think you're going?" I said, I got a buddy aboard this ship. And he said, "Well, not dressed like that, you don't." I said, "Well, what's the way I dress got the way to do with it?" He said, "You have to be in full dress uniform to board this ship." I said, "Man, this is all I have wore for 2 years." About 18 months at that time, or less than 18 months. But you mean I can't see my buddy? And he said, "Well, who are you looking for?" And I said, "A HB Ball." And this kid walking up the deck, and OD hollered for him to come over, and he said, "Go down to the dispatch office and tell him to hail HB Ball and tell him to make it to the officer deck on the double with a headpiece." The little white hat.
Right.
And well, it took 5 minutes. The size of that ship, a pretty good sized ship. It took 5 minutes for him to get down. Finally on the PA system. "Now hear this, HB Ball. Report to the OD on the double with a headpiece." And they repeat that 3 times.
Right.
Well, and about 5 minutes later, here comes old HB with a quizzical look on his face and a hat in his hand. And the officer let me on board with that hat. He wouldn't let me on board without that hat.
Right. You were full dressed then.
I was full dressed, and because I didn't have anything else put on.
Yeah.
So I got to visit him for about an hour.
Yeah.
And I showed him boat crews. You see all of our boats out there.
Right.
Well, he had came out of a unit like that, and he hated that regimentation. He hated it with a passion. We had no regimentation. We did what we wanted to do, our own games.
Sure.
We wanted to go fishing. Whatever we wanted to do, we did it. We were just there for our tour of duty and did it. So, old HV decided he wanted off that Argonne back on something like that. So he asked for a transport of the boat 215. No transfer. So he wrote a letter home, knowing it would be sent to him. And he told what he thought about Admiral Halsey. He told what he thought about Admiral Halsey's flagship. Everything that he disliked in him, knowing that he would be called before the carpet. So they called him up and he said, "What do you mean by this?" "I mean just what I said." And he said, "Well, what do you want?" He said, "I want off this so-and-so ship." He said, "Well, that you ain't going to get." And he said, "Well, what can I get?" And he said, "Well, you can always get Shanghaied." Shanghaied means you get assigned to a duty you don't ask for.
Right.
So they Shanghaied him off of and I think they did it on purpose. They Shanghaied him off the Argonne to a garbage scow that anchored at the boat 215.
I see.
And it's the little garbage scow's duty was ships could not dump garbage at sea. They had to wait till they were in a port and assigned dumping zone before they could dump. Because of stuff that can be picked up in garbage that can give away locations and information. So that little garbage scow had to make the rounds of the ships that came in from sea to the Davy Jones locker where they dumped all their garbage stuff on the garbage ship, and it took it to a designated dump zone. And it was made like a little coal hopper or something that had little hopper doors on the deck and opening doors on the side. So you put it in at the top and open the side doors and they just slide out into the ocean. And so all those hoppers was super flush with salt water. So you never got any of the odor aboard the ship.
Right.
It was dumped on the
Right.
And it was you could clean as a pin. You could eat off the deck of that thing.
I'll be darned.
And he got that. He got assigned to that. And so for the rest of the war, for about 8 months, he was either at the boat crew when he was off duty. He was over.
Yeah.
I was out on the scow when I wasn't on duty.
So it worked out okay for
Worked
you.
out for it. You know, he got Shanghaied all right.
You got Shanghai.
And I asked him when I was in Quan after we come home out of the Navy, I said, well, how'd you, looking back on it, and this has been about maybe 10 years ago, I said, how'd you like the garbage duty? The little garbage boat, he's just the best damn duty I had while I was in the Navy. But that was his last assignment. But,
Is he still alive?
yeah, he's still alive.
Where does he live?
He lives in Quanah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he liked to got killed in the West Texas Utilities at Lake Pauline, just out of Quanah, was the plant that furnished electricity for all that part of the panhandle, Quanah and Childress and up in there.
Right.
And he worked at that power plant, and they were in a shutdown rebuild. And they had a boiler blast, a boiler explosion. When they were trying to bring it back on the line, it exploded, and he got burned
Wow.
bad. And I like to not have survived it, but
Oh, my
he scarred up pretty bad from that. But he got the worst end of that was when he did him in the military. So Berlin was East Germany and Russia occupied that half, and the rest of it was American and British and our allies.
All right.
So when they shut us off, shut down the Autobahn, since the whole of Berlin is inside East Berlin, East Berlin, East Germany.
All right.
That they had to use the airlift to supply the troops that we had in Berlin. So as a result of that, Timco got contracts to make. And during that period of time, Chancellor move that made fighter planes, they made this little Gullwing Corsair, and their first successful jet that we had for aircraft operation was that Crusader jet.
Right.
And I made the pilot seats and the canopies for that Crusader jet.
I'll be darned.
For 12 years. I worked on that thing, and it was the last piston engine plane to go out of production. They moved down to Connecticut to the other operation. Timco had one, and we had the other plant, so it was Transport Aircraft.
Yeah.
Well, when my brother-in-law and I found out that they were moving, well, we would put in our application for a job there in that aircraft plant. So up until then, I had just worked on a door-to-door salesman, whatever.
Right.
No jobs available.
Right.
But that was in Grand Prairie, just between Dallas and Fort Worth. That's where that plant was. And I was in Quanah at the time. I had taken off my duties in Port Arthur, where I'd been down there for 2 years, went home to visit my folks. And my brother-in-law saw the ad in the paper, and he wanted to get his A&E license. He was in aircraft work and making gliders, and he had his flying license and what have you. And I did some GI flying in Port Arthur and I didn't get my license, but I got up to my license. I was qualified. The problem was we didn't have a instructor to give me my test.
Yeah.
So I had my private license at 58 hours for private flying. But anyway, doing that just for the fun.
Right.
Well, my brother-in-law said, Fred, I'll buy you a tank of gas if you'll take me down to Grand Prairie and fill out an application for this plant that's going in down there, because I want to see if I can get my A&E license. So he took me, I took him down. Well, I didn't go down looking for a job. I was kind of off between jobs, taking a little breather. And it was hot outside, and I waited. I didn't know. I thought he was just going to get an application and come back out. An hour later, he's still in there, and I said, you just talk to the cooler in there than it is out here. So I went inside, and they said, you looking for an application? Well, I didn't know what the whole thing was. Right at that time, I just had taken him down. And I said, well, yeah, I ain't done this. So she gave me an application, and I filled it out, took it back to her, and she said, come with me. And I still haven't seen my brother-in-law. She came and got me and took me to an interviewer, and he interviewed me and told me what the deal was. And that's the first time I knew that this aircraft plant was moving lock, stock, and barrel and taking over that plant, and they needed employees. So they brought a limited number of employees that left Connecticut and came down with them. So I put in my application. They hired me on the spot. I go back out in the lobby, and I'm waiting. I still haven't seen my brother. So after a while, he comes out, and his talent as a making gliders and things like that. Which he had some very expertise talent, and they put him in experimental. And they run him through the mill, and they put him in their experimental section. So that's what took him so long.
Yeah.
But they had me hired before he came out.
He thought you were just waiting in the car.
Yeah, I was waiting because it's hot. So I worked there 12 years.
I'll be darned. And this was Timco or?
Timco, when I worked for Chance Fault.
Okay.
And so Timco was the plant next door.
Right.
That's separate companies.
Yeah.
But they took over the old B plant, and we had the A plant. Well, both of them was on Hensley Field. As far as the two plants is, which is Navy base.
Right.
Mountain Creek Lake, out of between Dallas and Grand Prairie.
Right.
And
but you worked for Chance Fault.
so I worked for Chance Fault. That's where I went working.
Yeah.
And anyway, as a result, Timco got the contracts and that's where they got into aircraft work. They got the contracts to rebuild, bring these bombers and transport planes out of mothballs and make them into to cargo carriers for the Berlin airlift. And so that was back during that era.
Yeah.
And this is I went to work Chance Fault in 48. Married my wife in 1949. I've been married 57 years now. And then I did that until Russia launched their Sputnik.
Right.
And when Russia launched their Sputnik, that we were making fighter jets, and the big thing was, well, Russia doesn't have an intercontinental missile, and we're working on one, and we think we'll get there first. But when Russia launched Sputnik, that removed all questions of doubt. If they can put a vehicle in orbit, they have intercontinental ballistic capability.
Right.
So they canceled all of our contracts and had 18,000 people. Well, we had 8,000 people working at Chance Fault and laid off down to about 1,500. And so I worked a year after all the layoffs, and they kept cutting us back until they could get contracts. There was no hope for advancement and everything, and so every time they had layoffs, everybody took a cut. And now when they get back now to where I came in at, as far as my working salary is concerned, I said, nope, you can have it.
Yeah.
So I refused to take another cut.
Yeah.
Forfeited my seniority and ended up as a cash register salesman. And I retired. I started in 1962 in the cash register business, and ended up self-employed and retired in 1990.
And when did you come here?
I came here in 1978.
78? What brought you here?
Well, I was self-employed in the cash register business in Houston. But I started in the cash register business when I say back in 1962, which it was mechanical and electric. You know, everything was, it was driven by electric motor, but everything was mechanical function. Well, I did that until when in the 70s, they came out with the first digital stuff.
Right.
Japan had a special electronic display ship anchored at the port in Houston, and invited all the businesses. They sent out a personal invitation to all businesses of any sort to visit that electronic display. It was a display of Japanese technology, and they had computers with the digital displays, what they call the LED. First displays came out.
Yeah.
Anyway, that's a term for it, but it shook me. They had them on display, all of them. Well, when I saw that, I said, well, it's just a matter of time, because what is happening, they're showing on these calculators that it's 10 times faster than a mechanically operated calculator. So it's a matter of time before they make a computer, a printer that can keep up with the ability of that computer.
Right.
The problem now is that no printer was made that could keep up with the speed of that computer. So the display was instant. I mean, you could put something in and you had instant answers no matter how long it was. Where the old mechanical calculators, Olivetti's and all the different brands of calculators back then were chompity. It took 10 minutes to chomp out
a result. Yeah.
Result. So you could key the same information into that handheld computer, Samsung, not Samsung back then, but who was some of the first ones?
TI.
Yeah. anyway, the Sony and Tokyo, Tokyo Electric,
Yeah.
you keyed in instant answers on the display.
Yeah.
So we knew then it was a matter of time before there would be a mechanical printer that could keep up with it.
Right.
And so in about a year. So at that time, then I sold out my business and went to work for Malloy's Cash Register Company, who had a dealership for the first new electronic cash registers that came out. But I knew that it would be changing from mechanical ingenuity to electronic ingenuity, which I don't have any electronic degrees. You know, I'm not trained in electronic engineering. So I figured the days of the mechanic was numbered. So I was getting out while I could with holding the seat of my pants.
Yeah.
And I went to work for my competitor. And he sent me to Beaumont to open up a branch office in Beaumont. And I did that and was there for 5 years. Got that branch going good for him. And then he brought me here in 1978. He paid for the move and everything to open up this branch. Because what they were doing is that he had dealerships for large first on the line stuff in Houston, but he didn't have branch offices. And they were threatening to come here and open up branches, and which would take part of his territory away from him, and he'd just have to divvy up his territory.
Yeah.
And he didn't want to do that.
Yeah.
So he sent me here to open up a branch office rather than to have the company to come start another branch. So I came here in 78, and in 81, they began to make changes in the way they did business. And the electronic world is no way to compare it with the mechanical world.
Right.
And so the way they did business and the way they paid commissions and supported their dealers was altogether a different game. And so he closed down this branch office. But one of the things that had happened, I had learned that wherever I go and whatever I do, my customers are mine first and yours second. If I'm working for you, they're my customers, they're not yours.
Right.
See? So I didn't intend it that way. I just said I protected my customers, and it ended up that way. So when I ended up then out on my own, boy, the phone was ringing off the hook. I had more business, and I could take that. I don't have to hunt for a job because I've got more customers out there that want my continued business. So I ended up self-employed here.
Right.
And I became Mr. Cash Register for 10 or 15 years in this town.
Yeah.
All through the 80s up to 90. And I retired in 1990.
Right.
But Fred Holland's Cash Register Sales and Service. And I own nearly every cash register in this town.
Yeah.
Now that needs some qualifications. National chains, and that was what made the change in the thing. National chains, Sears, Walmart, Kmart, those companies, all of a sudden they quit buying from the dealers and started buying directly from the factory. See? Well, the old system was that you had no choice but to buy from the dealer, and the factory supported the dealer, and the dealer supported the customer.
Right.
Well, when the big ones, you know, Walmart and these others decided, well, now that's a step too much, and we don't want to pay that much, and so we'll blah, blah, blah.
Right.
So what they didn't realize is the factories was cutting their own throats by cutting out the dealer. And what they were doing is making the product, and since it was a programmable thing, not a mechanically engineered thing, it was a programmable thing, you could send it to the customer's warehouse with the program already in it.
Right.
But the thing they didn't allow for is that every place it went didn't have the same laws and regulations. Well, there's 50 states in this United States.
Exactly.
And there's, you know, hey, we got about 4 different tax structures right here in
sales
Texas.
taxes and different,
Right, and you got in the county tax, the city tax,
right,
and then you've got occupancy taxes and what have you, and so cash registers have to be programmed.
Right.
Well, when you ship it to the warehouse, it doesn't have anything in it, and they don't know how to do it. So the local dealer has to go out to well, they want you to go out there for free.
Yeah.
And straighten out their mess for them. Because they sent the machine to the warehouse with half the program in it. See, and so we said, well, you put it with a Sundoe shop. And so that's what I ended up, Malloy's shut down the office. That was what it ended up, is that they didn't want to pay the dealers to support the equipment.
Right, right.
And so you send it to them like that, you support it.
Yeah, yeah.
So then when I say I'm Mr. Casher, that was local mom and pop stores.
Right.
You sell locally, but national chains, they bought And,
Yeah. Where'd you get your cash registers?
well, every dealer.
Uh-huh.
What was funny, what taught me something is you got to learn by. Well, I was doing door-to-door sales when I give you sales motivation material, and sales motivation material tells you that you have to learn to do the job ahead of you if you want to get that position. You're going to have to qualify for that job before you expect to get it. And if you don't qualify, don't expect to get the job. So one of the things that I did, I learned that for every brand of cash register, there's a different routine. The nomenclature is different. The routine for programming is different. Sony has their way of doing it, Tech has their way of doing it, and Samsung has their way of doing it. Everything is different. Well, I kept all the material, and I learned. On everything, wherever I got, I managed to get the book. I had customers coming to me that had equipment that I wasn't dealership for. But if they had the books, I made them let me have the book. Because the book, you're going to lose it, and it doesn't mean anything to you. So I learned the ins and outs. And then I learned who knew what he was doing electronically and who didn't know what he was doing electronically. So my customers thought I was the greatest technician in the world.
Yeah.
But the greatest technician in this area was a little guy by the name Minh Ba, M-I-H-N-B-U-I, Vietnamese. Came during when they had to get out of Vietnam for their safety.
Right.
And married his wife after he came over here. But he was the one that learned the electronics ins and outs. And he didn't destroy equipment trying to fix it.
Right.
I found that local mechanics are trying to learn the job would burn up 5 parts trying to, experimenting and trying this and trying that. Well, men had bought a little electronic, it's not a computer, it's an electronic analyzer that put a probe here and it gave you a pattern on a little display. And it wasn't a strobe, I mean it was like a strobe, but it gave you that little pattern, and he knew exactly what every pattern had to look like. And you take something with a burnt out part on it, and he would put the probes here and put, okay, this is burnt out, and this part drives this part, so he would report, and even though that part's not burnt out, the burnt out part is burnt out for a reason, so you replace everything that's related to it.
Yeah.
And he'd go in and fix it just that quick, and it was fixed.
Right.
And so I was having to pay and drive to Houston and back to get this done. Well, he was needing, his wife was pregnant with their first child, and he was needing more income than he was making at that time. He said, well, I'm going to have to get me another job. Well, at that time, I'm taking all my work over, and the company that he worked for, and they're doing the work, and I'm paying them, more than I really need to be paid. So I said, well, do you have any objections? And it's from Bryan, from where he was at here, is about 95 miles. I said, do you have any objections to driving to Bryan once a week? This is after I became self-employed, and he said, no, why? I said, well, rather than you look for another job, why don't you just come to Bryan every Saturday, and I'll have more work, and I'll pay you piecework. I'll have more work than you can do every Saturday, and I'll pay you piecework for it, and you'll make more money doing piecework than you'll make working for the other guy. And that way, he didn't want to quit where he was at.
Yeah.
He had a good employer, and he liked it. He just needed more income. So that worked, and I taught him how to get into the cash register business independently without having a lot of money. You just have to have know-how.
Right.
And if you treat your customers right, they're going to be your customer. And being a Vietnamese, he needed a father figure, and I became that to him. Wow. And he became just a peach of a guy to me. And most of the time, he wouldn't even let me pay him for what he did, because I taught him how. As a matter of fact, he became my dealer. He became my supplier.
Is that right?
Yeah, he bought out the guy that he was working for. He was making enough money on the side that he bought up the guy he was working for and became my distributor.
Is he still in business?
Yep.
Where is he?
He's in Houston on, as you go in through Tomball, what's that highway number? When it hits I-45, you turn left, go a quarter of a mile, and the first little strip center on the right.
He's in there.
At the end of that strip center.
I'll be there.
And it's cash registers and scales.
Tell me about your family. You were married in 1949, right?
Married in 49, my wife and I.
What's your wife's name?
Johnny Francis.
Johnny Francis, okay.
And we had agreed that we would start. That house is soaked up into this house.
Right.
It was nearly paid for.
Yeah.
But it's now all in this one.
Yeah.
But that's pretty much our.
Well, let's go upstairs. Go upstairs and
110 miles. And it follows this layout around. That's Florida. That's Quanah. This is Red River. And the Quanah Acme and Pacific was owned by the Frisco. Out of St. Louis.
Right.
Came down through Oklahoma. And they ended up, the Quanah Acme and Pacific ended up in World War I in receivership. And Frisco ended up with the receivership, and then after World War I it bailed out. Frisco owned it lock, stock, and barrel.
Right.
But it never ceased operation, and it could operate so much cheaper as an independent railroad than Frisco could operate it. So they let it run right up to the end of the line, which in 1978, when I came here, was the last year of the QA&P.
Right.
So we can walk through it and see that much of it. That's Lake Pauline, and that's the West Texas Utility where my military buddy worked at the mail service.
Right.
And you're coming down this side, you come from Red River, into Quanah. Quanah Cottonseed Oil Mill is here. And so the agriculture, that part, what sustained the railroad when it came online in 1902, what sustained the railroad was cattle, wheat, and cotton, and then corn and milo and other stuff. So the things that supported the railroad was things that they looked to. So that was cottonseed, was taken out of the cotton, and cottonseed oil was prepared for the food industry. The hull went into cattle feed and what have you, and the cottonseed hull, not the cotton.
Right.
Bird. And then from here, this is a cotton gin, and there was 4 gins in Quanah. I modeled one of them, and that's a picture of the gin. These are scratch bill. This is, you're looking at the gin from that side.
Right.
And here you're looking at it from this side. And right here, if you're looking back, this is the QA&P headquarters. That's a picture of the, well, there, it's a museum now, but that's headquarters in Quanah Pacific. Now, the main line through Quanah was Fort Worth, Denver. And that's the depot, Denver, so you can see the little hometown railroad outshined it quite a bit. And so this is Quanah, and this is laid out just like it was laid out in the 40s and 50s in Quanah. That's the, of course, the roundhouse was much bigger, so we do what we call selective compression.
Right.
So suggest that was a roundhouse, a turntable, and the layout.
And you constructed this?
I constructed this when they built the house. This was a stick-built attic. And for 3 years I didn't do anything but just get my material ready and stuff. And I had to deck this in.
Right.
I had to move electrical wires and do things like that, so it took me a better part of the first 3 years that we ran it just to get it where I could deck it and wall it up.
Right.
And I talked to the builder about taking all these cross bricks and things out, and I said, what's going to happen structurally to the roof if I start taking these sticks out of here?
Yeah.
He said nothing. He said the only thing that those are in there for is to hold things in place until the walls are up and the roof is on.
Right.
He said, now, if you take them out, he said, the only thing then that's going to happen for it to come down, the walls would have to go out, and that's never going to happen.
Right.
So he said, you got to remember it's a big house, and from the pitch of the roof to the eaves, that's a long strand. He said, so you're going to have to support it somewhere mid-turn, midway. Well, I come in 10 feet from the outer edge, and that wall, and this is actually the roof of the house out here.
Right.
And so I put the wall up, and I did that all the way around. So when I got the wall up, and I got the sticks and things out of place where they was in the way. He said, they're just there to hold things plumb or in place until you get everything else up. And then once you do that, that serves better than this. All the cross beams. So, so that's what did this. And I took the bench work in, and nearly all you see here in the model railroad itself is in the last 5-6 years.
Wow.
And so we'll make a quickie here.
Okay.
Don't stay up here too long. And I'll light it up a little bit for you. So all the buildings will be up.
Right. Wow.
All right, this is the Acme gypsum plant, and the guy that owned the railroad that owned this gypsum plant, and that's what built the railroad. He had a running battle with the Fort Worth Denver in hauling his product to market, but they went north and south.
Yeah.
And he has to pay by the mile before they haul this stuff. And I don't know what the rate and policies were back then, but his beef was getting his product to market and how long it took to get it to market and how far it had to go just to go to the east coast or the west coast. You know, it had to go to Amarillo first before we could even start that in that direction, or go back to Fort Worth. So I'll build my own railroad. Well, he found out FCC says, no, you don't just build your own railroad. They control the railroads. If you open up new territories and bring the settlers in and create a new marketplace, then you can have a railroad. So there's no railroad across the Panhandle at that time. The Santa Fe had gone from Fort Worth up to the west side of the Panhandle to Amarillo, through Lubbock and Midland up through there. And the Fort Worth Denver came out of Fort Worth through Wichita Falls, Quanah, and Childers, and up to the Panhandle, and went to Denver. So those two railroads met at Amarillo. One on the east side of the Panhandle and the other one on the west side. So that left the center was still cattle country. All of that was Hardeman County and back through there. So he finally got a permit to build from Quanah across the Panhandle to El Paso by opening up a new territory. And so he went from Quanah to Paducah, and then to Paducah to Floridada, to Roaring Springs, and Roaring Springs to Floridada. And the Santa Fe said, well, no, we don't want him crossing our railroad, because if he crosses our line, he'll get a part of our product, of our market. So they built a spur they didn't want to do, but from Plainview down to Floridada, they built a spur and headed him off, and that's as far as he got, but he served his purpose. He opened up his east-west connection. So he built a little spur. So it became a bridge line, served his purpose. He owned this plant. This is Salina Gypsum, cement company. And this plant is still there. Now, if you go to Quanah, if you go to Amarillo on Highway 287 today, you will go over, I've got some pictures taken. That is taken from this overpass. Okay, you're on an overpass that's coming right through here, where this highway's at. You're on an overpass that's coming high over, and it's a curved bank like this. You don't see, because of the high bank of that curve, you don't see any of this back there. You don't even know it's there. And so here's the pictures taken of that plant when you get off of that overpass and look down. And that's a mighty big plant there. And they make sheetrock.
You see the water tower there?
That's the water tower. You'll see, and what I'm doing is doing back in the 50s, not what it is now. Now it is owned by Georgia Pacific. But at the time, the era that I'm modeling was Bestwall. Acme Bestwall. And so I'm modeling what was there back in that period, but they built a lot of new buildings.
I see.
So I've got, for instance,
I like the smoke coming out of the smokestacks.
I went to Quanah and did a lot of rail fanning. And I went to City Hall, and they had a map of the original plant layout. So that's, if you'll see it here, that, okay, this is the track coming off and going back into the plant. And there's that little spur coming in there, and that's this spur going there. And that's those two buildings. But I had to scale it down, so that building I had to chop it off. And I couldn't come on out with it. And the building's back there. So everything that you see there, the office building is here, pretty well laid out like power plant. So that was a power plant that furnished the power to it. And this gyp rock is all underground. And so they've been there, and they make plaster cements, medical cements, they make dental supplies. They make everything you can think of out of that sheet rock, out of that gypsum. And it's a real white chalky rock. And so they make cement and the sheet rock and all of that.
This is just beyond fascinating. This is amazing.
Yeah, to me, right now, bringing back to my military, my employment, not my military. This is Peace River. There's the old bridge, is still there. The bridge is not there, but the bench and pilings are still there. The bridge is out. But this is Peace River. And this is Paducah. My dad died in Paducah. He lived there. He died. And mother and dad separated back in the 30s.
I see.
is the old compress where the bale of cotton after it was ginned. The cotton came here to be baled and sent to the textile mills. And the seed went to the cottonseed mill, both one on the west side of the corner and the other on the east side.
Yeah.
So that's what you see here, and that's the building that's there.
Right.
That building, this building, and this building. So that's all. There's no kits available for that, so it has to be scratch built.
All be done. Oh my goodness.
So that's a hobby now. Getting back to my retiring
Right.
from my castrator days. When I retired in 1990, I saw my customers and business associates dying off. You know, they'd retire, and they wouldn't last 2 years, and I'd be reading their obituary or going to their funerals.
Right.
I said, what's wrong with these guys? You know, and then it finally dawned on me, well, they ain't got nothing to do.
Exactly.
You know, when you retire, you got to have something to do. You got to have a reason to get out of bed.
So this is your survival here.
This is my survival. I didn't get into this hobby until in the late 80s, and I decided I'd model my hotel. I never was involved in it before.
Right.
But I decided to model this. I became the president of the Brazos Valley Railroad Society from 1990 to 2000.
Have you got any pictures of this?
Yeah, matter of fact.
I mean, like overhead pictures or something?
Yeah. I got two things now. One is, how much time you got? Am I want you to come up here?
No, you're doing fine.
Well, I'll show you something. You might not want to fool with this, but let me see where I'm at.